You wake up, and the world is just absolute crushing darkness.
Right, completely black.
Yeah, it is a heavy, suffocating blackness that just presses against you from every conceivable angle.
Right.
And the temperature is bone-chillingly cold, hovering just a few degrees above the freezing point. But you don't shiver.
You don't even feel the cold the way we would.
Exactly. The environment around you is completely devoid of light, yet it is never, ever still. You can feel the ocean. And I mean, it isn't just a body of water down here. The ocean is a restless, breathing entity.
It's a massive physical force.
It really is. It's surging and pulling, and its invisible currents are just tugging violently at your body. But you hold your ground. You're encased from head to toe in this thick, heavy, rigid suit of armor.
An armor that feels, as dense as stone. It's covered in sharp ridges. These are formidable spikes and heavy plating. And you are walking just painfully slowly along a jagged, treacherous, rocky landscape at the very bottom of the world.
Right.
Every single step you take has to be meticulous. It has to be deliberate because the ocean currents are constantly trying to sweep you away into the abyss. You're a survivor operating in one of the harshest, most unforgiving environments on planet Earth, which is the freezing, turbulent midnight zone of the coastal seafloor.
But then, suddenly, the water pressure shifts. It is barely a ripple-like, a microscopic change in the fluid dynamics of the current. But your entire nervous system screams a warning.
Something is out there.
Yes. Something massive is moving through the darkness directly above you. A shadow, which to your eyes is larger than a car, just lunges out of the impenetrable gloom. It's a giant predatory fish.
As a massive Atlantic cod or something.
Yeah, an ancient monster of the deep with a mouth wide enough to swallow you whole. It strikes with terrifying explosive speed. You raise your heavy armored limbs to defend yourself to block the strike, but the fish's jaws clamp down with just devastating force on your right arm.
And the kinetic force of that is crushing. You are completely pinned.
You are. The predator thrashes, and you feel yourself being dragged upward, right, away from the safety of the rocks and into the open, vulnerable water column. Panic should set in, but your biology is equipped for this exact nightmare.
You have a secret weapon.
You possess a shocking, desperate, and incredibly violent survival mechanism. With a sudden, explosive flex of your muscles, you execute the unthinkable. You willingly, intentionally detach your own arm.
You literally snap it off at the base.
Yes. There is a specialized fracture plane built right into your shoulder joint, and in a fraction of a second, a muscular sphincter clamps shut to stop the bleeding. You just leave your heavy armored limb behind in the predator's mouth as this fleshy, distracting prize.
And in that exact same split second, you contract the massive, tightly coiled muscles of your tail. With a soundless underwater boom, just a massive displacement of water, you blast yourself backward.
Rocketing blindly through the dark, you slam back into the safety of a deep, narrow, rocky crevice, wedging yourself into the stone, just out of the monster's reach. You are missing an arm, your biological systems are surging with stress hormones, but you are alive.
It is quite the introduction to today's story, honestly.
It really is. Welcome back to Saltwater Stories, everyone.
We are so glad you're here with us.
The creature we just described, the one that routinely sacrifices its own limbs to escape the terrors of the deep, is none other than the American lobster.
Known scientifically as Homarus americanus. And that framing is so important because most of us only ever see the American lobster in a completely artificial context.
Right, like sitting sluggishly in a brightly lit, sterile glass tank at a grocery store.
Exactly. We're resting on a dinner plate with a side of melted butter. When you take them out of their element, they just seem like simple, primitive bugs. But when you actually observe their lives on the seafloor, you realize they are absolute biological marvels.
They truly are. They are highly complex, deeply sensitive creatures that have evolved over millions of years to master a world that would instantly crush us. And our mission today is to step inside that armor. We want you to experience the ocean exactly as they do.
Because for them, the ocean isn't just a static backdrop. It's a dynamic, terrifying, and magical character that shapes every single second of their existence.
Let's start unpacking that mastery. Because the first thing I realized when preparing for this was just how alien their sensory experience is. Let's go back down to the seafloor for a minute.
Okay, setting the scene.
Imagine a fully grown adult lobster, safe in its rocky fortress. The sun has set far above, and it is the middle of the night. The lobster decides it's time to hunt.
It's hungry.
Exactly. It takes a step out of its cave, and immediately it is hit by a chaotic storm of information. The currents are swirling around it, carrying thousands of invisible chemical messages.
Which is overwhelming if you think about it. If you or I step into the dark, we are effectively helpless. I mean, we are visual creatures.
Totally helpless.
Yeah.
But for the lobster, the darkness is where its senses actually come alive. Because vision is, well, it's a secondary sense in the deep ocean. The lobster navigates using an entirely different set of rules. As it steps out onto the mud, it begins to literally read the ocean floor.
And the mechanism for how it does this is astounding. It's tasting the ground.
Yes. I had to stop and really think about this to make sure I was understanding it correctly. If I walk barefoot through my kitchen in the pitch dark and step on something squishy, my feet only tell me the texture, right?
Right, you just know it's squishy.
I have to reach down, pick the thing up, and bring it to my face to figure out if I stepped on a grape or a piece of bread. The lobster doesn't have to do that. As a lobster walks across the muddy seafloor, it is actively tasting the mud with its feet.
It is a phenomenal adaptation called contact chemoreception. The inside edges of a lobster's walking legs are lined with thousands of microscopic hair-like structures. They're called setae.
But they aren't really hair, are they?
No, you have to imagine these not as hair, but as incredibly complex biological instruments. Each individual seta is essentially a hollow, porous tube that houses bundles of sensitive nerve endings.
Wow.
And these nerves are specifically tuned to bind with amino acids and other chemical compounds in the water. They are the underwater, high-definition equivalent of human taste buds.
So it's not just feeling the shape of the rock, it's doing chemical analysis on the fly. It's like walking across a pizza in the dark and knowing exactly what the toppings are, down to the brand of the pepperoni, just through the soles of your shoes.
That's a perfect analogy. As the lobster taps its legs along the rocks and the mud, water flows through those tiny porous tubes. The chemical molecules in the water bind to the receptors, sending instantaneous electrical signals up the leg and into the central nervous system.
So it knows exactly what's down there.
Exactly. It can taste if a snail crawled over that exact rock 10 minutes ago because it detects the residual mucus trail. It can taste if a clam is buried 3 inches down in the sediment because it detects the faint chemical signature of the clam's exhaled water filtering up through the mud.
That is wild. But tasting the ground only solves half the problem, right? I mean, it tells you what is directly underneath you in immediate physical contact.
Oh,
What about threats or food that are 20 feet away?
you need early warning systems.
Right. If the water is pitch black and murky, how do they know if there's a cod lurking just at the edge of their awareness?
That is where the antennules come into play, and this involves some really fascinating fluid dynamics. If you look closely at a lobster's face, right below those little stalked eyes, you'll see 2 short, split antennas that are constantly twitching.
The little short ones, yeah.
Those are the antennules, and they serve as the lobster's nose. But a nose operating in an ocean current faces a massive physics problem.
Right, because water is incredibly dense and viscous compared to air. Smells don't just drift in a nice straight line. I imagine it's like watching smoke come out of a chimney on a really windy day. The smoke swirls, breaks apart into chaotic little puffs, and forms these complex turbulent clouds.
Exactly. Biologists refer to these as chemical plumes. The ocean is full of these chaotic, swirling eddies of scent. To make sense of this turbulent chemical landscape, the lobster has to overcome what physicists call the boundary layer effect.
With the boundary layer effect, what is that exactly?
Essentially, water is sticky. When water flows over a surface, like the sensory hairs on the antennule, a microscopic layer of water right next to the hair doesn't move. It sticks to the surface, acting like a shield, preventing new scent molecules from reaching the nerve endings.
Oh, I see. So it gets clogged up with old smells. How do they break that shield?
They flick. The lobster engages in a highly calculated mechanical behavior where it whips those antennules downward at a very precise speed, exactly 4 times every single second, or 4 hertz.
That's incredibly fast.
It is. And by snapping the antennules down that rapidly, the physical force is strong enough to thin that sticky boundary layer. The rapid movement forces the new water and the new scent molecules within it deep into the dense forest of sensory hairs.
So the downward flick is essentially a really sharp, deep inhale.
Precisely. And then, as the antennule slowly returns to its starting position, it moves much slower. This allows that sticky boundary layer of water to thicken up again, effectively trapping the water sample in place against the sensory hairs.
Oh, just long enough for the nerves to analyze the chemical makeup.
Right, so they take 4 distinct, high-definition sniffs of the water every second.
And because they have 2 antennules spaced apart on their head, they are getting stereo smells. They can compare the concentration of a smell on the left side versus the right side in a fraction of a second, mapping out an invisible 3D chemical highway.
It's brilliant engineering by nature.
It really explains how they can follow a zigzagging trail of a hidden crab or detect the faint chemical exhaust of a dangerous cod in total darkness. But this brings up a huge question that I found myself struggling with.
What's the contradiction you're seeing?
Well, if their chemical sensing is this highly evolved, if they are perfectly designed to navigate, hunt, and evade predators using 3D scent plumes and tasting the mud, why do they even have eyes?
Ah, the eyes.
Yeah. You look at their anatomy and they have these two prominent black beads sitting on movable stalks on top of their head. From a biological standpoint, if you live in a pitch black, murky environment, eyes are a liability.
They cost metabolic energy to grow, for sure.
And they are a weak point on the armor. What is the point of having eyes at all if it's too dark to see?
It seems counterintuitive until you look at the physics of how those specific eyes work. The lobster did not evolve an eye that works like ours. In fact, its visual system defies what we typically understand about optics.
How so?
Human eyes, and the eyes of most vertebrates, rely on a process called refraction. We have a curved biological lens, the cornea and the crystalline lens, that bends the incoming light rays, focusing them onto the retina at the back of the eyeball.
Right. But refraction has a major limitation. Bending light requires a lot of light to begin with, and it requires a significant difference in density between the air outside and the fluid inside the eye.
Exactly. Underwater, the density of the water is very similar to the density of the fluids inside a biological lens, which makes bending light much harder. Plus, in the deep ocean, there simply isn't enough ambient light to bend. A human eye down there is useless.
So what did the lobster do?
Millions of years ago, the evolutionary lineage of the lobster threw the curved refractive lens blueprint completely out the window.
They didn't just throw it out. They completely reinvented the physics of sight. They abandoned lenses and adopted mirrors.
They have what is scientifically classified as a reflecting superposition compound eye. If you put a lobster's eye under a powerful microscope, you won't see a smooth, curved surface. You will see a grid made up of thousands of microscopic tubes.
Like a honeycomb.
Not quite. Here is the jaw-dropping part. These tubes are not round. They aren't hexagonal like a bee's honeycomb either. They are perfect geometric squares.
Nature almost never builds in perfect squares. Why is square?
Because of geometry and the laws of reflection, the inside walls of these microscopic square tubes are perfectly flat and lined with specialized crystals made of purine. Purine is an organic compound, but in this specific crystalline structure, it acts as a flawless microscopic mirror.
So if I'm visualizing this correctly, the surface of their eye is essentially a dome made of thousands of tiny, perfectly mirrored square tunnels.
Exactly. When whatever tiny microscopic glimmer of light exists in the deep ocean, perhaps faint moonlight filtering down or the bioluminescence of plankton hits the lobster's eye, it enters these square tubes.
It bounces.
Yes. Because the tubes are arranged at highly precise right angles to one another, the light doesn't bend. Instead, it reflects off the perfectly flat, mirrored walls and is funneled downward, concentrating all the incoming light from multiple tubes onto a single, highly sensitive point on the retina below.
It's basically a biological light-gathering bucket. Instead of trying to bend a single weak beam of light, they are collecting light from a massive 180-degree field of view, bouncing it around, multiplying its intensity.
And focusing it so they can see moving shapes and shadows where human eyes would register absolute zero blackness.
And what blows my mind is how this exact biological quirk solved one of the biggest problems in modern human astrophysics.
The X-ray telescope connection.
Yes. It is a flawless example of biomimicry. When astrophysicists were trying to figure out how to build a space telescope that could see X-rays coming from deep space, like the radiation emitted by exploding stars, supernovas, or black holes, they hit a wall.
Because X-rays are tricky.
Extremely. X-rays are incredibly high energy.
Yeah.
If you try to point an X-ray at a traditional curved glass lens, it doesn't bend. It just shoots straight through the glass or gets absorbed by it. You can't refract an X-ray.
Which means traditional telescopes were totally useless for X-ray astronomy.
Exactly. So scientists were stuck until they looked at the ocean. They literally copied the design of the American lobster's eye. They built a space telescope instrument called the Lobster Eye Imager.
That's just bananas.
Isn't it? Instead of a curved glass lens, they manufactured thousands of microscopic, perfectly square glass tubes, lined the insides with a highly reflective heavy metal coating, and arranged them in a sphere.
Mimicking the Purin crystal.
Exactly. The high-energy X-rays enter the square tubes, glance off the mirrored walls at very shallow angles, and are funneled down to a focal point. Our ability to map the most violent high-energy events in the deep cosmos exists purely because we stole the optical blueprint from a crustacean that has been crawling around the mud for millions of years.
It is a stunning realization. Nature solved the physics of low-light, high-energy optics eons before humans even existed.
So they have this absolute mastery over their sensory environment. They can track a scent plume through turbulent water, taste the microscopic history of the mud, and see a shadow moving in the pitch black using geometric mirrors.
But sensory intelligence only keeps you alive if you can act on it. Knowing a predator is coming or knowing a meal is sitting right in front of you is useless if your body isn't equipped for the physical encounter.
Right. And this is where we shift from sensory biology to mechanical warfare. If the senses are the radar, the claws are the heavy artillery. The ocean is an incredibly competitive arena, and the lobster is essentially a biological Swiss Army knife built for combat.
Let's set a new scene to illustrate this. Our lobster is creeping along a rocky ledge, tasting the rock, when it encounters a sea urchin.
Oh, a sea urchin. For those who haven't seen one, a sea urchin is basically a living pincushion. It is a hard, calcified, dome-like shell, completely covered in long, needle-sharp, often venomous spikes.
Most predators take one look at an urchin and swing the other way, right? It's too much effort and way too much pain. But our armored knight just walks right up to it.
The first thing you notice about an adult American lobster, the feature that truly defines them, is the massive front claws. But the truly fascinating aspect of their anatomy is the asymmetry.
The two claws do not match.
They don't. They are completely different tools designed for completely different jobs. One claw is relatively slender, elongated, and lined with sharp razor-like serrations along the inside edge. This is known as the cutter claw, or the pincer.
No.
The other claw is absolutely massive. Swollen, bulbous, heavy, and lined with thick, blunt, rounded teeth that look almost like human molars. That is the crusher claw.
So you have a pair of precision tweezers on one arm and a sledgehammer on the other, but the difference isn't just in the shape of the shell, is it? It's in the actual cellular makeup of the muscles inside those claws.
Absolutely. The internal biology of the claws dictates their function. The cutter claw is packed almost entirely with fast-twitch muscle fibers.
Which means it's quick.
Super quick. These fibers have short sarcomeres, the basic units of muscle contraction, which means they can contract with blinding speed. If a fast-swimming fish, a shrimp, or another nimble prey darts by, the cutter claw can snap shut in a fraction of a second. It is designed to slice, snag, and hold on to fast-moving targets.
But speed usually means a sacrifice in total power.
Exactly. The cutter claw is fast, but it isn't exceptionally strong. The massive crusher claw, however, is built entirely of slow-twitch muscle fibers. These fibers have very long sarcomeres.
So they're slower to close?
They contract much more slowly, but they generate an astonishing amount of sustained kinetic force. They trade speed for overwhelming bone-breaking power.
How much power are we talking about here?
The crusher claw of a large adult lobster can generate up to 256 newtons of sustained force. To put that in perspective, that is roughly equivalent to the bite force of a wolf, but localized into a pair of underwater pliers. It is more than enough pressure to easily snap a human finger like a dry twig. So when our lobster encounters that spiky sea urchin, the strategy is flawless. It uses the fast, precise cutter claw to carefully hold and manipulate the urchin, rolling it around by the spikes to find the optimal angle.
Like a wrestler looking for leverage.
Exactly. Then it brings in the heavy artillery. The crusher claw clamps down on the main body of the urchin and simply obliterates the hard, calcified shell, cracking it wide open to get to the soft, nutrient-rich food inside.
It is the perfect tool set for a benthic predator. But here is the detail that is most fascinating to me. Lobsters are not born right-handed or left-handed. They are not genetically pre-programmed to have the crusher claw on a specific side.
Wait, really? So if I look at a baby lobster, it doesn't have one big claw and one small claw?
No, it doesn't. When a lobster is just a tiny juvenile settling down onto the ocean floor, its two claws are perfectly symmetrical. They look identical, both functioning basically as small cutter claws.
So how does one turn into a sledgehammer?
The asymmetry, the development of that massive bulbous crusher, is entirely dictated by a neurological feedback loop based on how the young lobster interacts with its environment.
Meaning, the ocean literally sculpts their body based on their behavior. It's like a bodybuilder focusing on one specific arm at the gym. How does the biology actually facilitate that change?
It's a process of cellular remodeling driven by mechanical stress. As the young lobster hunts and explores, it naturally starts to favor one claw for manipulating hard objects, like trying to crush a tiny clamshell or a piece of gravel.
Just by random chance it picks a side.
Pretty much. And when it uses, say, its left claw for this heavy, resistive work, the physical strain stretches the sarcomeres in the muscle tissue. This mechanical stress triggers a signaling cascade in the lobster's nervous system.
Ah, so the nerves tell the body what's happening.
Right. The nerves send feedback to the muscles, effectively saying, we need more power on this side.
So the body listens to the mechanical stress.
Yes. The body responds by altering gene expression in that specific claw. It literally begins to dismantle the fast-twitch myosin proteins and replaces them with slow-twitch, heavy-duty muscle fibers.
That's incredible.
The more the lobster cruxes with that claw, the bigger and bulkier it gets during the next molt. It becomes a crusher claw purely through experience. If you were to put a baby lobster in a tank with absolutely no hard objects to crush, just soft food, it would grow up with two cutter claws. It requires the resistance of the ocean to forge its weapons.
That is just beautiful. The environment acts as the blacksmith for their armor. Okay, so our adult lobster has used its environmentally forged crusher claw to smash open the sea urchin. It uses its little walking legs, tasting the food as it goes, to pass the pieces up to its mouth. But there is a terrifying missing piece here.
Oh, I know where you're going with this.
The lobster doesn't have teeth in its mouth.
It doesn't. The mouth parts on a lobster's face, known as maxillipeds, are highly complex appendages, but they aren't used for chewing. They serve to sort, hold, and perhaps tear the food into slightly smaller, swallowable chunks, but there is no mastication, no chewing happening in the head.
So they swallow these hard, sharp chunks of sea urchin shell whole,
They do.
which sounds like an anatomical disaster.
Yeah.
If I swallow a shard of a clamshell whole, it's going to perforate my esophagus and I'm going to have a very bad time.
Yeah.
How does the lobster process raw, sharp, calcified shells sitting in its gut?
They have a hidden anatomical trick, and it involves completely relocating the chewing process. They chew their food with their stomach. Deep inside the lobster's foregut is an incredibly complex mechanized apparatus called the gastric mill.
The gastric mill. It sounds like an industrial rock crusher.
That is a very accurate description, honestly. From an evolutionary perspective, putting heavy jaws and massive chewing muscles in the head of an animal covered in a rigid exoskeleton is inefficient.
Right, it takes up too much space.
Exactly, and it ruins the aerodynamic shape needed to swim backward quickly. So evolution moved the teeth down into the midbody. The gastric mill is a set of 3 heavy calcified plates, 1 dorsal tooth, and 2 lateral teeth suspended inside the stomach lining.
And they are controlled by muscles outside the stomach.
Exactly. Powerful extrinsic muscles attached to the outside of the stomach wall. Once the lobster swallows the food whole, these muscles contract in a rhythmic, complex pattern. The stomach physically churns, and those 3 internal teeth grind violently against one another, acting like millstones.
Oh.
They completely pulverize the sea urchin shells, crab carapaces, or fish bones into a fine paste that can then be passed into the digestive gland for nutrient absorption. If you put a stethoscope up to a lobster that has just eaten, you can actually hear the grinding, crunching sound coming from deep inside its chest cavity.
That is beautifully horrific. They're a creature with eyes made of geometric mirrors, claws that alter their own cellular structure based on use, and a stomach that chews rocks.
It's an alien biology.
It really is. When you list it out like that, their biology is so fundamentally alien, so completely divergent from mammalian evolution, that it brings up a deeply philosophical and scientific debate. With a nervous system so incredibly different from ours, do they actually experience the world, specifically when it comes to pain?
Yes. Nociception and animal welfare. This is a critical and heavily debated topic, particularly because of how humans have historically interacted with lobsters in the culinary world. For decades, the prevailing scientific dogma was that invertebrates like lobsters simply did not have the neurological hardware to feel pain.
Right. The old culinary myth was always, oh, you can drop them in a pot of boiling water. They don't have a real brain. It's just a reflex. They don't actually feel anything.
That was the assumption. The logic was based on anatomy. Humans and other mammals process the complex emotional and physical experience of pain in the cerebral cortex, a massive centralized brain structure.
Which lobsters obviously lack.
Right, lobsters don't have a cerebral cortex. They have a decentralized nervous system composed of a series of ganglia or nerve clusters spread throughout their body. Because of this, it was assumed that any reaction a lobster had to a harmful stimulus was merely nociception, an automatic, unthinking reflex.
Like a robot pulling a sensor away from a hot stove without any internal experience of suffering.
Exactly. But there are some really fascinating stories about experiments that completely challenge that assumption.
I was reading about those. The methodology is fascinating.
The experiments were designed to test whether the lobster's response was just a simple reflex or if it involved complex central nervous system processing. Researchers set up controlled environments where they applied mild, localized electrical shocks to the tails or antenna of the lobsters.
And obviously the lobsters reacted.
Violently, they engaged in that rapid, powerful tail-flipping escape response we talked about earlier, blasting themselves backward to get away from the source of the shock. They also exhibited prolonged grooming behaviors, intensely rubbing the specific area that had been shocked, much like a human rubbing a stubbed toe.
But again, a skeptic could argue that's just a complex reflex. The nerve fires, the tail flips, no brain involved.
Which is exactly why the next phase of the experiment was so vital. They introduced analgesics painkillers. But they didn't use some specialized invertebrate chemical. They used human-grade pharmaceuticals.
Like what?
They applied local anesthetics like lidocaine to the specific shocked areas, and in other trials, they introduced systemic pain relievers like aspirin into the lobster systems.
Wait, I have to push back here. Aspirin is a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug. It works by blocking specific enzymes in humans to stop inflammation. Does a lobster even have the same inflammatory pathways, or are we just anthropomorphizing them by giving them aspirin?
That is the brilliant part of the methodology. Evolutionary biology shows that certain basic chemical pathways are highly conserved across millions of years of divergence. While their nervous system looks different structurally, the chemical messengers, the neurotransmitters and inflammatory modulators, share ancient similarities with ours.
So it actually worked.
The results proved it. When the lobsters were treated with lidocaine or aspirin, their behavioral response to the electrical shocks dropped dramatically, and in some cases, ceased entirely.
The tail flipping stopped. The aggressive grooming stopped.
Furthermore, when they drew hemolymph, which is the biological equivalent of blood in crustacean systems, a copper-based blue fluid, they analyzed it for stress hormones. After a shock, the stress markers in the hemolymph spiked massively. But when the lobsters were pre-treated with analgesics, those chemical stress markers did not spike.
So, synthesizing all of this, if a chemical that targets the central processing of pain in mammals also turns off the physical and chemical reaction in the lobster, it destroys the simple reflex argument.
Exactly. A reflex bypasses the brain. It can't be dulled by systemic painkillers in this manner. The fact that the response is modulated by analgesics strongly implies that the lobster possesses a centralized processing system for noxious stimuli. It means they possess a nervous system complex enough to encode, process, and suffer from what we classify as pain.
It completely flips the script. It forces you to look at this animal not as a mindless, armored bug operating on clockwork reflexes, but as a sentient creature experiencing its environment deeply.
And speaking of experiencing the environment, their sensitivity isn't just about pain or hunting. It is deeply tied to how they communicate with one another. Because to survive, and specifically to reproduce, they have to speak the ocean's secret chemical language.
Let's shift our narrative to late summer. The ocean water has warmed up, reaching the perfect temperature threshold. Down in the complex, rocky crevices of the reef, the giant dominant males have established their territories.
And these males are hyper-aggressive. They will violently fight off any other lobster that comes near their prime real estate, using those massive crusher claws to defend their dens.
Now, a female lobster is ready to mate, but she faces a terrifying biological hurdle. She has to approach one of these massive, territorial fighting males, enter his den, and convince him not to rip her apart.
It is the ultimate high-stakes negotiation.
It's like walking into a gladiator arena and hoping the champion is in a romantic mood. She can't wave a white flag. She can't use vocalizations. So how does she bypass his aggression?
She uses chemistry. She has to speak directly to his nervous system using pheromones. To pacify this aggressive giant, she literally manufactures a complex pheromone perfume. But the delivery mechanism for this perfume is one of the most unique adaptations in the animal kingdom.
I am so glad we are talking about this because this is simultaneously one of the most brilliant and deeply unglamorous facts about marine biology. A lobster's bladder is not located in its lower abdomen. It is located inside its head, positioned right underneath its brain.
And the exit point for the bladder They urinate out of their face.
They pee from their face.
They do. They possess two small excretory nozzles, anatomically called nephropores, which are located at the base of their long sensory antenna, pointing directly forward.
And in the context of mating, it is a highly calculated weapon of chemical warfare.
It is. The female lobster approaches the perimeter of the male's rocky den. She doesn't enter immediately. Instead, she stands outside and begins releasing a steady, pulsed stream of urine laced with a highly potent, specific sex pheromone.
But in the turbulent ocean currents, just releasing it isn't enough, right? It
Yeah.
would wash away. She needs targeted delivery.
So she uses her respiratory system. Lobsters breathe using gills located under the sides of their carapace. To pull oxygenated water over these gills, they have specialized appendages called gill bailers, which beat constantly.
Creating a current.
Right. This beating creates a strong, focused, forward-facing water current that shoots out from the sides of her mouth. She literally injects her pheromone-laced urine directly into this high-pressure gill current. It acts like a biological water cannon, firing the chemical message accurately up to 7 body lengths away straight into the darkness of the male's den.
She is effectively power washing his house with a chemical love potion.
And it works flawlessly. The male's supersensitive antennules, those flicking hairs we discussed earlier, intercept the plume. The specific pheromone molecules cross a blood-brain barrier and act as a profound neurological override.
It changes his behavior completely.
The chemical physically suppresses his aggressive territorial instincts. His posture lowers. He stops acting like a gladiator and allows her to enter the den peacefully.
Okay, so she successfully navigated the minefield. She's inside the fortress. But the danger is far from over, because to actually mate, she has to initiate a biological process that sounds like an absolute nightmare of claustrophobia and vulnerability. She has to molt.
This is the phenomenon of exodosis. The lobster's armor is made of titan and calcium carbonate. It is a rigid, inelastic box. It cannot stretch.
Right.
So imagine being a growing organism trapped inside a suit of armor that is 2 sizes too small. The only physical way to grow, and the only way to expose the soft reproductive organs required for mating, is to shed the entire shell.
The mechanics of this are just a staggering feat of hydrostatic engineering. It doesn't just pop off like taking off a jacket. Days before the molt, the lobster's hormones trigger the resorption of calcium.
It literally sucks the calcium out of its old shell into its bloodstream.
Yes, and stores it in 2 little white stones inside its stomach called gastroliths so it can reuse the minerals later.
The shell weakens. And then the true ordeal begins. The carapace, the large plate covering the back and head, splits open just a fraction of an inch along the midline. The lobster must then systematically, painstakingly pull its entire living body backwards out of that narrow crack.
I want everyone listening to try and visualize the physics of this. Think about that massive crusher claw we talked about. That bulbous, fleshy, heavy muscle has to be pulled backward through the narrow, rigid joints of the arm joints that are perhaps a quarter of the size of the claw itself.
How is that physically possible without tearing the muscle to shreds?
Exactly. It requires extreme hydraulic manipulation. The lobster pumps hemolymph blood out of the claw, shunting the fluid into the core of its body. The claw muscle completely deflates, shriveling up until it is thin enough to squeeze through the narrow joints of the old shell.
Once it is free, the blood rushes back in. It's like pulling a water balloon through a keyhole by draining the water, pulling the rubber through, and reinflating it on the other side.
But the claustrophobia goes even deeper. It's not just the external shell. The exoskeleton extends inward. The delicate lining of their feathery gills and the lining of their stomach, including the heavy calcified plates of that terrifying gastric mill we talked about earlier, are all made of chitin.
Which means they must be shed too.
Yes. As the lobster pulls itself backward out of the shell, it must simultaneously pull the chitinous lining of its own lungs out through its gill slits and vomit up the lining of its stomach and the gastric mill out through its mouth.
It is the equivalent of a knight escaping a suit of armor made of their own bones while simultaneously pulling out the lining of their own esophagus. It is an unimaginably traumatic biological event. And once she finally rips herself free,
She is completely, utterly helpless.
she is essentially a giant, exhausted creature made of soft jelly. Her new shell, which was forming underneath the old one, is paper-thin, wrinkled, and completely uncalcified. She cannot stand up.
Because she has no structural support.
Right. Her claws are too soft to pinch. They would just bend like wet cardboard. In the open ocean, she would be instantly devoured by a cod, a shark, or even another lobster. This extreme vulnerability is exactly why she had to pacify that dominant male first.
She relies entirely on his aggression for survival. He stands guard at the entrance to the rocky den, using his hard shell and massive claws to fight off any predators, while she hides in the dark behind him.
While in this soft state, mating occurs. But immediately after, she begins the crucial task of expansion. She starts swallowing massive amounts of seawater, pumping it into her tissues.
She swells up, expanding her soft body drastically. She becomes significantly larger than her old shell. Then, over the next few weeks, she uses those calcium gastroliths stored in her stomach, along with minerals absorbed from the ocean, to harden the new, larger shell.
She literally inflates herself to create growing room for the next few years. And as a miraculous side note, if she had lost a leg or a claw in a fight a few months prior, this molt is when regeneration happens.
She can literally push out a brand new, fully functional appendage. It might be smaller than the original, but the fact that a complex organism can regenerate a limb encased in armor is astounding.
It is a profound biological reset. But the entire purpose of this massive expenditure of energy isn't just about her own growth. It is about propagating the species.
Once she has mated and her shell has hardened, she will leave the male's den. She can store the male's sperm internally, keeping it viable for a year or more, waiting for the perfect environmental conditions.
Eventually, she fertilizes her eggs and extrudes them, gluing them firmly to the specialized swimmerets on the underside of her tail.
Which takes our story away from the rocky crevices and up into a totally different realm of the ocean, because the story of a giant, heavily armored, bottom-dwelling lobster actually begins as a microscopic speck floating helplessly in the abyss.
Let's picture this mother lobster now. She is carrying a massive clutch of eggs on the underside of her tail, looking almost like a cluster of tiny blackberries. Depending on her size and age, she could be carrying anywhere from 10,000 to an astonishing 80,000 tiny eggs.
80,000, that's a whole city.
It is. And she becomes the ultimate dedicated protector. For nearly an entire year, enduring the freezing winter and waiting for the warmth of the spring, she carries them.
She doesn't just passively hold them, she meticulously maintains them. She uses her walking legs to carefully clean the egg mass, picking off parasites or fungal infections. She constantly fans her swimmerets, creating a steady flow of oxygen-rich water over the developing embryos.
But her protection has a biological limit. She cannot shield them once they hatch. On an early summer night, driven by the changing temperature of the water, she climbs to a high, exposed point on the rocks.
She lifts her heavy tail, waves those swimmerets wildly, and suddenly thousands of tiny translucent larvae are ejected into the vast open ocean, and they look absolutely nothing like the armored knight we've been discussing.
They are the size of mosquitoes. They have huge, bulbous, alien-like eyes, no heavy claws, and feathery little legs designed for swimming, not walking.
These are the pelagic stages. In marine ecology, the pelagic zone is the open water column, the vast expanse between the surface and the seafloor. As soon as these tiny larvae are released, a powerful instinct kicks in.
They are what biologists call positively phototactic. They are intensely attracted to light, so they frantically paddle upward, abandoning the dark bottom, and swim toward the sunlit surface.
For the next few weeks, they become part of the plankton, the microscopic soup of life drifting on the ocean currents.
They are completely at the mercy of the ocean's moods. The wind, the surface currents, and the tides dictate where they go. And the ocean, in this stage of their life, is a terrifying, ravenous force. It is purely a numbers game.
The mortality statistics are staggering. Out of those 80,000 eggs the mother spent a year protecting, how many actually survive this floating phase?
It's estimated to be a 99.9% mortality rate. The open ocean is a buffet. These tiny floating morsels are consumed by small fish, seabirds, jellyfish, filter-feeding whales, and other plankton.
Or the currents simply sweep them out into the deep ocean, away from the coastal shelf, where they eventually starve or freeze. During this month-long drift, they undergo 3 distinct molting stages, growing just a fraction of an inch each time. But the vast, vast majority are simply erased from existence.
99.9% gone. The ocean takes almost all of them back. But for the incredibly lucky 0.1% that survive this gauntlet, something magical happens. They reach stage 4.
Stage 4 is the great metamorphosis. Suddenly the creature molts again and its entire anatomy shifts. It stops looking like a feathery alien and actually starts to look like a miniature translucent adult lobster, complete with 2 tiny outstretched claws extending in front of it like Superman flying.
But the most dramatic change isn't anatomical, it's neurological. Its instincts completely flip.
Right. Remember how they were positively phototactic, drawn to the sunlight? At stage 4, a neuroendocrine switch flips in their brain. They become profoundly negatively phototactic. Suddenly, the light terrifies them.
They tuck their tails, point those tiny claws downward, and they dive. They abandon the surface and swim aggressively down into the dark, cold depths, heading straight back to the seafloor. They are desperately looking for a home.
This is called the early benthic phase.
Hmm.
And if you observe these animals, you realize this is the single most critical bottleneck in a lobster's entire life cycle. This tiny creature, which is barely the size of a human fingernail, hits the ocean floor. And its fate over the next 10 minutes depends entirely on the specific texture of the mud it lands on.
If the ocean currents drop that tiny stage-fee lobster onto flat, sandy mud with no features, it is effectively a death sentence. It is completely exposed against a uniform background. A foraging crab, a bottom-feeding fish, or an adult lobster will spot the movement and consume it almost instantly.
The lack of structural complexity on the seafloor is lethal.
But if the currents are kind and it lands on a bed of cobble, a complex, rocky area full of small stones and deep crevices, or perhaps a dense underwater meadow of eelgrass, it immediately darts into the darkest crack it can find.
And it hides. It doesn't come out. It will stay wedged in that microscopic fortress for years, operating strictly at night, barely peeking out to taste the current, filtering tiny bits of food drifting by and waiting until it has molted enough times to build armor thick enough to survive in the open.
The transition from a floating speck of plankton to a benthic hider is entirely driven by timing. But how does a creature with no calendar, no concept of seasons, and a primitive nervous system know exactly when to hatch or when to metamorphose and dive?
I found this part so profound because it proves how the ocean is the ultimate conductor of their lives. They don't have calendars, but they are tethered to a master thermal clock. Their entire metabolism and development are dictated by the temperature of the surrounding seawater.
This is beautifully illustrated by something called the Perkins Eye Index. This measurement was developed to understand the embryonic development of lobsters. If you take a tiny lobster egg from a mother's tail and look at it under a microscope, you can see the dark pigment of the developing embryo's eye spot.
And the size of that eye spot tells you exactly how fast the biological clock is ticking.
Precisely. At water temperatures around 5 degrees Celsius, the embryo's metabolism effectively stops. The eye spot stops growing, and the egg goes into a state of winter stasis.
But as the ocean warms up,
As it hits 10 or 15 degrees, the metabolism kicks in, and the eye spot grows at a highly predictable, mathematically measurable rate. By measuring the microscopic diameter of that eye under a lens and cross-referencing it with the daily water temperature, you can predict almost to the hour when that specific egg will hatch.
the ocean's temperature is the throttle for their existence. Warm water hits the gas pedal, cold water hits the brakes, which perfectly transitions us into one of the most mind-bending biological realities of this animal. Because once that tiny fingernail-sized lobster hides in the rocks, survives the gauntlet, and starts growing, it just keeps growing and growing.
Let's fast forward through time. Imagine we are aboard a deep-sea submersible, exploring a massive offshore submarine canyon, dropping deep down into the abyss where the water is permanently bitterly cold. Moving slowly, methodically across the deep-sea mud is a giant.
A true giant.
It is a lobster that weighs 20, maybe even 30 pounds. Its massive carapace is scarred, heavily pitted, and covered in a miniature forest of barnacles and algae. This specific animal might be 80 or even 100 years old.
A century old. Think about the historical timeline of that. That lobster was walking around in the dark, tasting the mud before World War II began. But here's the craziest part of the biology. If you were to take a tissue sample from that 100-year-old giant and put its cells under a microscope next to the cells of a 5-year-old lobster, they would look identical. The old cells don't look old.
This phenomenon is one of the greatest biological mysteries. American lobsters exhibit a trait called negligible senescence. Senescence is the term for biological aging, the process where cells degrade over time, muscle tone is lost, organs fail, and the organism eventually dies of old age.
The lobsters don't do that.
Lobsters do not experience this cellular degradation. They do not age the way humans, dogs, or mammals do.
How is that even biologically possible? Every living thing degrades over time.
The secret lies within their DNA, specifically governed by a remarkable enzyme called telomerase. To understand this, we have to look at how cells divide. In human cells, at the very ends of our chromosomes, we have little protective caps of DNA called telomerase.
A common analogy is to think of them like the little plastic tips at the end of your shoelaces called aglets that stop the lace from fraying.
That's exactly how they function. Every time a human cell divides to repair tissue or grow, that telomere cap gets just a tiny bit shorter. Eventually, over decades, the telomere burns down to nothing, the shoelace phrase.
The cell hits a limit, right?
Right, it hits what is known as the Hayflick limit. It can no longer divide safely, it becomes senescent, and our bodies begin to fail. This is the fundamental mechanism of human aging.
But the American lobster plays by a different set of genetic rules.
They do. Unlike adult humans, the American lobster possesses an active, endless supply of the enzyme telomerase in nearly all of its tissues throughout its entire life. This enzyme's sole job is to constantly repair, rebuild, and lengthen those telomeres.
So the plastic tips on their genetic shoelaces never wear out.
Exactly. Whenever a cell divides, the telomerase rebuilds the cap. Their DNA is kept pristine, allowing their cells to replicate flawlessly forever. Biologically speaking, at a cellular level, they are immortal.
Okay, I have to stop you because basic logic dictates a massive contradiction here. If their cells never age and they never stop molting and growing, why isn't the Atlantic Ocean filled with thousand-year-old lobsters the size of minivans?
Because of the tragic, inescapable physics of indeterminate growth. While their internal cells do not age, their external environment and the sheer physics of their own body eventually betray them. We have to go back and look at the molting process.
The nightmare of exegesis we talked about.
Right. When a lobster is young, pulling a 1-pound body out of a small shell takes a moderate amount of metabolic energy. But as an animal increases in size, its volume and mass increase exponentially faster than its surface area.
So it gets harder every time.
When a lobster weighs 30 pounds, the sheer caloric and metabolic energy required to dissolve the calcium, crack open a massive, thick, multi-kilogram suit of armor, and hydraulically pump a giant body through those tiny joints is astronomical.
So they don't die of old age.
No, they die of exhaustion.
Yeah.
Eventually, the century-old giant reaches a critical mass where it simply cannot consume enough calories to fuel the metabolic nightmare of the next molt. It stops molting. And when a lobster stops molting, its armor begins to degrade.
It can't repair itself anymore.
Right. It cannot shed parasites, it cannot repair shell damage, and opportunistic infections seep into the chitin. They ultimately succumb to disease, or they attempt the molt and die mid-process, trapped inside their own indestructible armor.
Trapped in their own indestructible armor. It is a profoundly poetic and tragic end for a century-long life. But before we leave this ancient deep-sea giant, we have to look closer at its shell, because there's a detail here that proves how deeply interconnected the ocean is. This giant lobster isn't just an animal. To an entirely different species, this lobster is a literal planet.
This is one of the most astonishing discoveries we've ever found. If you take a microscope and look extremely closely at the mouth parts of this giant lobster, specifically those complex, sweeping maxillipeds it uses to sort food, you will find an entire hidden alien world.
A microscopic universe sitting right on its lip.
The creature is called Symbion americanus, and it is so strange, so biologically unprecedented that when it was first discovered living on the lips of lobsters in the 1990s, they couldn't just categorize it into a new family or genus. They had to create an entirely new phylum of Life-Cycliophora just to classify it.
That's huge.
Yeah.
To put that in perspective, humans, birds, fish, and reptiles all share the same phylum. Symbion americanus is as biologically different from a lobster as a human is from a jellyfish.
And its entire universe is the mouth of a lobster, exclusively. Thousands of these microscopic creatures live solely on the mouth parts of the American lobster. They attach themselves to the hairs of the lobster's face using a specialized adhesive disc.
What do they even eat?
They possess a funnel-shaped mouth surrounded by a ring of tiny, rapidly beating cilia. As the giant lobster uses its massive crusher claw to obliterate a sea urchin or a crab, tiny crumbs and microscopic particles of food float up into the water column. Symbion americanus sits there peacefully, like a tiny vacuum cleaner, sweeping those microscopic crumbs into its mouth.
Living its entire complex life cycle on the chin of a giant. And lobsters have absolutely no idea they are even there. It's a completely harmless relationship. But wait, if they live permanently attached to the lobster's shell, what happens when the lobster goes through that horrific molting process? When the lobster sheds the lining of its face, doesn't it throw away the entire symbiont population?
That is the most brilliant part of their biology. These microscopic creatures are chemically tapped into the lobster's endocrine system. When the lobster begins producing the hormones that signal an impending molt, Symbion americanus detects the chemical shift in the water.
They know it's coming.
Yes, this triggers them to instantly shift their own reproductive cycle. They rapidly produce specialized, free-swimming offspring. Just as the lobster sheds its old face, these tiny offspring swim through the turbulent water and immediately attach themselves to the brand new soft shell of the newly emerged lobster.
ensuring the survival of their micro-universe. It is a breathtaking web of synchronicity. It makes you realize how deeply connected every single organism in the ocean is. The lobster relies on the temperature to hatch, the urchins rely on the kelp, the symbiont rely on the lobster's hormones. Which brings us to the final and perhaps most urgent part of our story today. Because this intricately connected ecosystem is currently facing a massive, unprecedented disruption.
The ocean is a dynamic place, but right now, the baseline conditions of this environment are shifting in a way they haven't in millions of years. We discussed how the ocean acts as the master thermal clock for the lobster, dictating its growth, its hatching, and its habitat. Well, the data is alarming. The ocean is running a fever.
It is. Specifically, the Gulf of Maine, which has historically been the cold water heartland and the most productive habitat for the American lobster, is currently heating up 99% faster than the rest of the global ocean.
99% faster. That is a staggering rate of change. And when the foundational temperature shifts that drastically, the impacts ripple through the entire food web. To understand the stakes, we have to look at the lobster's hero role in the ecosystem.
We mentioned them hunting sea urchins earlier. That isn't just an isolated predator-prey interaction. It is a critical ecological service. By eating those urchins, lobsters are acting as the apex guardians of the underwater forests.
This is a classic example of a trophic cascade. Sea urchins are voracious herbivores, and their absolute favorite food is kelp, the towering, nutrient-rich macroalgae that forms dense underwater forests along the rocky coasts. Kelp forests are the nurseries of the ocean, providing crucial habitat for hundreds of species of fish, crabs, and marine mammals.
But if left unchecked?
If the predator population is removed, the sea urchin population explodes. A swarm of sea urchins will act like an army of underwater lawnmowers. They chew through the base of the kelp stalks, completely clear-cutting massive, beautiful forests, turning vibrant ecosystems into barren, desolate landscapes known as urchin barrens.
Just miles of bare rock and spikes. But the American lobster steps in as the heavy artillery. By constantly hunting and crushing the sea urchins, the lobsters keep the urchin population balanced, which allows the kelp forest to thrive. The lobster protects the forest, and the forest houses the ecosystem.
But the protector of the forest is currently under siege by the warming waters. The American lobster, adapted for millions of years to frigid waters, has a very strict physiological threshold. When the water temperature hits 20 degrees Celsius, which is 68 degrees Fahrenheit, the lobster's biology begins to fail.
68 degrees feels like a refreshing, cool swimming pool to us. But to a subarctic benthic crustacean, it is a physiological boiling point. What actually happens inside their body at that temperature?
It comes down to oxygen. Their blood relies on a copper-based protein called hemocyanin to bind and transport oxygen. As the water temperature rises past 20 degrees, the molecular affinity of hemocyanin to bind with oxygen drops significantly.
So they can't breathe as well.
At the exact same time, the warmer water increases the lobster's metabolic rate, meaning it needs more oxygen just to survive. It creates a state of severe biological stress and tissue hypoxia. They are essentially suffocating in warm water.
And when an organism is stressed to the point of suffocation, its immune system collapses.
Exactly. Their internal immune cells, called hemocytes, lose their effectiveness. And when the immune shield drops, opportunistic bacteria that naturally live harmlessly in the ocean suddenly turn hostile. Specifically, chitinoclastic bacteria that eat chitin begin to literally bore into the lobster's beautiful, hard armor.
It causes a devastating, highly visible condition known as epizootic shell disease, or ESD.
The descriptions of ESD are just grim. The shell becomes pitted with deep, black, rotting lesions. The armor literally dissolves. And because the water is so warm, it artificially accelerates their molting cycle, forcing them to try and shed the diseased shell before they have the metabolic energy to survive the process.
The disease absolutely decimated the historic lobster populations in southern New England waters like Long Island Sound over the last 2 decades. The water simply became too hot to survive. So what are the lobsters doing in response?
They are executing a massive silent migration. Over the past 20 years, the center of the lobster population has steadily marched northward toward the colder waters of Canada. They are also diving much deeper, abandoning the shallow, warming coastal bays and seeking refuge in the frigid, high-pressure depths of offshore submarine canyons to escape the heat. They are fleeing the ocean's fever.
It is a massive geographical shift happening right beneath the waves. But as you look at all of this, you realize the lobsters aren't fighting this battle against a changing ocean entirely on their own. For all the pressure human activity puts on the marine environment, there's a deep century-old tradition of human ingenuity and conservation fighting to protect this creature.
Absolutely. One of the most successful and enduring conservation practices in marine history is a grassroots effort pioneered by lobster fishers themselves. It is called V-notching.
I love this story.
It's a great one. When a fisher pulls a heavy trap from the bottom and discovers a female lobster inside, carrying a mass of eggs on her tail, they don't harvest her. They take a specialized tool and physically carve a small, painless, V-shaped notch directly into the edge of one of the flippers on her tail.
It's a physical mark, like a badge of honor. But wait, we just spent an enormous amount of time talking about how lobsters molt and shed their entire shell. If they carve a notch into the hard shell, won't it just disappear the very next time she molts?
That is the genius of the practice. The notch isn't just a scratch on the surface. The cut goes deep enough to alter the epidermal cells, the living tissue underneath the shell that secretes the chitin. Because those specific shell-producing cells are removed or scarred, when the lobster grows her brand new soft shell underneath, the new shell forms with the V-notch already built in.
The mark survives the molt.
It does. It can persist through multiple molts over several years. That V-notch marks her as protected royalty. It serves as a visual signal to every other fisher who might catch her in the future, communicating that this female is a proven mother. She has successfully bred and is vital to the survival of the species.
And even if she isn't actively carrying eggs the next time she's pulled into a boat, it is strictly illegal to keep a V-notched lobster. She is immediately thrown back into the dark water to breed again and again, safeguarding the spawning stock for future generations.
It is a beautiful partnership between the harvesters and the harvested, and this protective ingenuity extends beyond just the lobsters to the entire ecosystem sharing their water. Because fishing for lobsters historically involves a lot of vertical ropes in the water.
Yes. Traditionally, a lobster trap sits on the seafloor, connected to a brightly colored buoy floating on the surface by a long, heavy vertical rope. The problem is that the waters of the Gulf of Maine are also a critical migratory route for the North Atlantic right whale, one of the most critically endangered marine mammals on Earth.
These massive whales can easily become entangled in those vertical ropes, leading to severe injury or death.
So modern engineers looked at this problem and developed something called ropeless fishing gear.
It is a marvel of acoustic engineering. Instead of having a rope constantly stretched through the water column, these new traps sit quietly on the seafloor with all their rope coiled up tightly inside a weighted container. There is no vertical line in the water at all.
If there is no rope and no buoy, how does the fisher find the trap in the middle of the ocean, let alone haul it up from 300 feet down?
Sound. The traps are equipped with highly specialized acoustic receivers. When the fisher's boat navigates to the exact GPS coordinates, they lower a transducer into the water and send out a highly specific encoded sound signal, a unique acoustic ping that travels through the dense water. The specific trap on the bottom hears its unique sound, and a mechanical latch triggers.
The acoustic key unlocks the trap.
Precisely. The latch releases, and a buoyant spool of rope or a compressed air balloon rapidly floats to the surface, bringing the end of the rope to the fisher exactly when they need it. It completely eliminates the persistent vertical ropes in the water column, allowing the right whales to swim freely and safely, while still allowing the fishers to harvest the lobsters and maintain their livelihoods.
It is human ingenuity at its absolute finest, combining advanced acoustics and fluid dynamics to protect an entire interconnected ecosystem.
We set out today to understand the American lobster through a vast array of incredible stories, and what we found is a creature that defies every simple expectation.
We started by looking at a supposedly simple crustacean, but discovered a heavily armored biological marvel, an animal that navigates the pitch-black freezing currents using geometric mirror box eyes that literally inspired human X-ray space telescopes. A creature that tastes the microscopic history of the mud with its feet, smells invisible 3D chemical highways by calculating fluid dynamics with its flicking antenna, and negotiates survival by firing pheromone perfumes into the water.
It chews rocks with a set of calcified teeth hidden deep inside its stomach, processes pain in ways that challenge our understanding of invertebrate neurology, and can willingly detonate its own arm to escape the jaws of a sea monster.
It is a creature that holds the biological secret to cellular immortality within its DNA, maintaining pristine telomeres for a century, while carrying entirely separate microscopic alien universes on its lips. It acts as the apex guardian of the kelp forests, balancing the delicate scales of the benthic food web.
And as we think about all of this, there's one final provocative thought that I cannot stop turning over in my head. We talked about how the lobster's telomerase enzyme constantly repairs its DNA, preventing its cells from ever aging. Human science is currently pouring billions of dollars into longevity efforts, desperately trying to understand how to stop human cells from fraying, how to cure the diseases of aging.
The quest for the fountain of youth.
Exactly. And yet, the biological blueprint for cellular immortality isn't hidden in some futuristic lab. It is currently sitting in the freezing, dark mud at the bottom of the ocean, wrapped in a suit of spiky armor, chewing on a sea urchin. It makes you wonder if the ultimate cure for human aging is just waiting for us to fully decode the genetics of this ancient survivor.
It is a humbling perspective. This ancient lineage of armored knights has survived for millions of years. Their ancestors outlived the dinosaurs. They survived the massive, crushing ice sheets of the ice ages. But as the ocean's fever rises today and the waters shift faster than they ever have in Earth's history, their greatest test of survival is happening right now, in our lifetimes.
So, the next time you stand on the shore or look out from the deck of a boat, don't just look at the ocean as a flat, blue, empty surface. Remember that the water is a living, breathing force.
Remember the complex, fragile, and endlessly resilient lives fighting, adapting, and surviving in the dark, cold depths beneath the waves. Thank you so much for joining us on this amazing journey into the extraordinary biology of the ocean.
Keep your eyes on the horizon and let your imagination sink beneath the waves.
See you next time on Saltwater Stories.